Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. The United States has launched strikes against Islamic State militants in Syria. According to the Pentagon, the United States fired 47 Tomahawk missiles from warships as well as airstrikes from fighters, bombers, and drones. According to the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights, at least 20 Islamic State fighters were killed in strikes that hit at least 50 targets in Raqqa and Deir al-Zor provinces in Syria's east. U.S. Central Command said Bahrain, Jordan, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates had either participated in or supported the strikes against the Islamic State. The United States also acted alone against a separate militant organization known as the Khorasan Group, saying it was taking action to disrupt, quote, the imminent attack plotting against the United States and Western interests. The Syrian Observatory for Human Rights said the strikes west of Aleppo killed 50 fighters as well as 8 civilians, including 3 children. The Syrian government said the United States had informed it of the pending attacks hours before the strikes began. We'll have more on Syria after headlines. The strikes in Syria begin after 6 weeks of U.S. airstrikes that failed to significantly alter the landscape in Iraq, where the Islamic State has claimed vast swaths of territory. On Monday, reports emerged dozens and potentially hundreds of Iraqi soldiers have been killed after militants overran a base north of Fallujah. An Iraqi lawmaker told the New York Times more than 300 soldiers died after the loss of Camp Saklawiya. Meanwhile, the Islamic State has released a second propaganda video featuring British freelance journalist John Cantley, in which Cantley warns U.S. efforts in Iraq and Syria could become another Vietnam. The French government has confirmed one of its citizens is being held hostage in Algeria by a group that claims ties to the Islamic State. The group Soldiers of the Caliphate has threatened to kill 55-year-old Hervé Gordel unless France stops bombing Islamic State positions in Iraq. France launched the airstrikes on Friday. French Foreign Minister Laurent Fabius vowed the kidnapping would not change France's involvement in the U.S.-led offensive.
Everything is being done in close cooperation with the Algerian authorities to obtain the release of our compatriot, but we must not hide the fact that the situation is extremely critical. France's attitude remains the same. We intend to do the maximum needed to free the hostages, and more specifically this hostage. But one terrorist group cannot influence France's position.
Here in New York, one day after the largest climate march in history, thousands marched on Wall Street Monday to highlight the role of corporations and capitalism in fueling climate change. At a protest dubbed Flood Wall Street, people sat down in the streets just blocks from the stock exchange. They remained for more than 8 hours until the police deployed tear gas and began arresting more than 100 people. The action came ahead of today's United Nations Climate Summit, where leaders from 25 nations will discuss an international agreement to cap record emissions of greenhouse gases. We'll have more on the protest in today's summit later in the broadcast. The heirs of Standard Oil tycoon John D. Rockefeller have formally announced plans to purge their $860 million foundation of fossil fuel investments. At a news conference Monday, Stephen Heinz of the Rockefeller Brothers Fund explained why Rockefeller's heirs were moved to join the growing movement to divest.
The diversity of the people who are involved in this, from every sector, from every walk of life, communities of just extraordinary diversity all across the country, tells me that this is getting to be more mainstream, which is very, very exciting. And the other thing is that it's clear that there's a moral imperative here, but there's also an economic opportunity embedded in this, which gives people something positive to do.
New data paints a much bleaker picture of the Ebola outbreak in West Africa. On Monday, World Health Organization predicted without urgent improvements, there will be more than 20,000 cases of Ebola by early November, with thousands of deaths per week. Ebola is at risk of taking root and becoming endemic in West Africa. World Health Organization Strategy Director Christopher Dye said Ebola is nowhere near under control.
One of the key messages that we want to get across is that we are now in the third explosive phase of growth of the epidemic. This is exponential increase, with hundreds going into thousands of cases per week. And if we don't stop the epidemic very soon, this is going to turn from a disaster into a catastrophe.
The WHO's official death toll has topped 2,800 with about 6,000 total cases, but that's likely a vast underestimate. A New York Times reporter who visited a cemetery in Freetown, the capital of Sierra Leone, reported 110 Ebola victims had been buried there in just over a week. By contrast, since the outbreak began, the country's health ministry has confirmed just 10 cases for the entire city and its suburbs. Sierra Leone recently imposed a lockdown and house-to-house searches, recording at least 130 new Ebola cases and 39 suspected cases. Shiite Houthi rebels have seized new ground in the Yemeni capital Sana'a a day after signing a truce with the government. Sunday's deal with the rebels calls for Yemen to form a new government following weeks of unrest. According to the Associated Press, 340 people have been killed in fighting over the past week alone. On Monday, the rebels captured the home of a top general as well as military bases and tanks. Israeli forces say they've killed 2 people suspected of kidnapping and killing 3 Israeli teenagers in the West Bank in June. The teens' disappearance prompted an Israeli raid in the West Bank and its ensuing assault on Gaza, which killed more than 2,100 Palestinians, most of them civilian. Israel originally blamed Hamas for the kidnappings, but later acknowledged Hamas leaders played no role. Today, the Israeli military said it killed the 2 suspects in an exchange of fire in Hebron. The Obama administration's unveiled new rules to combat corporate tax inversions, where companies move overseas to dodge U.S. taxes. Companies like Burger King, Medtronic, and the drug maker AbbVie have announced plans to relocate after buying foreign firms. Critics say the rules announced Monday by Treasury Secretary Jack Lew are not enough to end the practice without involvement from Congress. And the Obama administration's increasing the U.S. nuclear arsenal despite President Obama's public championing of disarmament. When Obama won the Nobel Peace Prize in 2008, the Nobel Committee cited his steps toward reducing nuclear stocks around the world. But the New York Times reports Obama's overseeing extensive rebuilding of nuclear weapons at home, including at a new plant in Kansas City dedicated last month, which is larger than the Pentagon and employs thousands of people. According to a recent federal study, the U.S. is poised to spend up to $1.1 trillion over the next 3 decades on modernizing nuclear weapons. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman.
And I'm Aaron Maté. Welcome to our listeners and viewers around the country and around the world.